I named the talk, do you need event sourcing framework or not? Or you don't need event sourcing framework, or do you? The motivation for me was, and still is, that we keep hearing that, well, event sourcing is easy and you don't need a framework for it because, yeah, basically because it's so easy. So you can do everything yourself. I've done quite a lot of development, including event source systems. So I'm in IT or writing software professionally since I was 14. So it's been a few decades for me. And the last 7-8 years, I've been doing event source software mainly. And I could tell you for a fact that, well, it's not exactly as some people claim. So let's move on. This is a tweet from Greg Young, our founding father of EventStore. He tweeted back in 2013, and it's been almost 10 years since that tweet has appeared. Want to learn event sourcing? It's a function of state and events producing new state. That's what it is, right? So do we need framework for that? Well, it's just a function. However, we could try to understand it from this phrase. It's just a left fold. I could add a small print is mine, whatever it means. I found quite a lot of articles in the internet, and this is maybe the most perfect example because it comes maybe on the first and second page on Google if you try to search for event sourcing. Don't let the internet dupe you. Event sourcing is hard. So we have two conflicting statements. On one side, people are saying event sourcing is very easy. You don't need nothing. You just start doing things, and it's just left fold. On the other side, the internet is full of articles like this, which claim that event sourcing is hard. So what's the problem? What is the truth? Who do I need to listen to? As an illustration for this particular article, don't let the internet dupe you, is this diagram. Diagram on the left. I was trying to find it elsewhere and I couldn't. So I don't know exactly where it's coming from. The article claims it comes from the book Microsoft Disclosure. Well, okay, I don't know. I haven't read this book. Does it talk about event sourcing or not? But definitely not. That's not how you do event sourcing. There are other diagrams. I once created a small Twitter storm posting diagrams that I found in the internet about event sourcing, and 90% of them are wrong. They introduce quite a lot of complexity. They add components like a messaging or message bus or event bus and have event store on the side. So it all looks very complex. And I think this is one of the reasons why people claim event sourcing is hard. There is a known vendor, which I wouldn't name today, but you can guess, which also promotes event sourcing done using their own product, their own infrastructure, which, according to them, is like a silver bullet. You can put everything there, and then you can consume these events elsewhere and produce read models or query models somewhere else, like in the search and in the cache and in the monitoring app and the database, and all of it is covered by one single thing, one piece of infrastructure, and all events are the same. So the problem there, that's also not exactly what event sourcing meant to be. So how does it go in reality when people look on all these articles about that contain those diagrams that I shown without reading the article? Don't let internet dupe you just yet. So they start their own journey and they try to build an event source system. I found this slide deck on one of public places, so it's not something private. So I hope it's okay. I use it. These are not my slides. These are slides from that slide deck explaining the history of people who try to build an event source system for the first time. So the slide deck says, we went for a quite classic event sourcing and CQRS stack, and that's where the first surprise comes to me. Like, okay, I can live with akka and persistent actors. Maybe that's okay. But then event storage, they choose Apache Kafka, and it's a distributed append log. It's like, yeah, but it's not exactly an event storage. It's a message broker. It's a distributed partitioned event log, which exposes the capability of the broker. It's not really designed to be used as an event store. And then on the query side, it's Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is a great search engine database. You can call it database, although some people might disagree with me, but maybe it's not exactly a silver bullet. Again, if you want to cover your query needs, you don't necessarily need to use Elasticsearch, or you would use Elasticsearch and something else like MongoDB or relational database. So that was already quite surprising. But okay, maybe they succeeded, right? Let's check what happened. Building the system went well. Building a system is cool, trendy topic, find lots and lots of tutorials. That I actually doubt. There are probably a lot of wrong tutorials, but not that many good tutorials. A good team could do it. The system was built, users started using it, and at the beginning, everything went well, almost everything. So here we see the signs. Something is coming. So what is that? After some time in production, and this is where it's interesting, most tutorials focus on so-called day zero. And that's not only tutorials about event sourcing, like tutorials about everything. I might say this is quite typical because when I learn something and I find it cool, I write a small article. This is what I learned. I don't really dive into, into some advanced topics on the subject. If people are doing it for a living, like professionals, professional trainers, they deliberately like hook you up by writing a small article saying this is cool, but if you want to learn more, buy my book, buy my course and stuff like that. By the way, if you want to learn more about event sourcing, you can buy my book. Joking. So commentaries on long-running systems are quite scarce, and that's true. There are multiple reasons for that. Some people don't want to expose their mistakes, but some people don't really want to comment on their long-running systems because they decided to rewrite the application back to more traditional persistence or structural persistence. And then they write a blog post. Don't let the internet do you, event sourcing is hard. And the system runs for some time, and like now this person who created the slide deck can share some experience, and I believe in that slide deck every single potential pitfall that exists in the event sourcing world, they hit it. So the issue there was that, well, they created a bunch of tooling themselves based on the classic event sourcing stack, which is not classic at all, and well, it didn't really work out. They were struggling to keep the system running in production, because production is not a sandbox. Production is not a toy box. There are actual people using your system, and they do some crazy things, and system behavior might become unexpected under circumstances like increased number of requests, network failures, unreliable or unreachable databases. Elasticsearch might behave this particular case in a strange way because it behaves with big volumes quite differently than compared to what it does in small volumes. Nevertheless, so they actually went really well in terms of exposing their own flaws, or not really flaws. The team wasn't flawed. It's just that the knowledge had gaps. Knowledge about event sourcing had gaps. They admitted, and they did something to fix it. But not everyone does it. In most cases, we observe a situation like this. We tried, we failed, and we have something to blame. Maybe that person who advocated for event sourcing already left. It's even easier because like we just say we give up. Nobody wants to teach us how to do it properly. We don't have the tools. We don't have the knowledge. And I can assure you that event sourcing is hard. So all of that shows me that it's not just bloody left fault, it's something else, right? There is something else involved in making the event source system successful. So this is also like event sourcing underwhelmed and still underwhelmed. So how that could be fixed? So I try to, Jerry Weinberg has this law of strawberry jam. So you can spread thin and then cover a lot, or you can just put the berry itself in the middle of the sandwich, and then it will stand out and create a lot of impact. I wrote a book, which is the title is Hands-on Domain-Driven Design with .NET Core, which is already old-fashioned. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. We have .NET, and a lot of people complain about it. It's not my fault. It was publishers' need. I think they wanted to capitalize on every new version of .NET and asking me to write a book or edition. DDD, hands-on DDD with .NET 5, hands-on DDD with .NET 6, hands-on DDD with .NET 7. I didn't go for it, so that's the only edition that the book has, unfortunately. But why I started to talk about it is actually event sourcing book in disguise. And I think in the subtitle somewhere it mentions event sourcing, but you can't see it. And that's the biggest problem. So even people who want to learn about event sourcing, they don't find this book. And I have to admit, I haven't covered quite a lot of content that I will be putting in such a book today in that book, because it's, again, maybe day 0 and maybe some of day 1 problems, but definitely not day 2+3 problems. So, but people tell us, all right, you can do it yourself, right? It's simple, it's just left fault. Let's start by looking at something. Maybe this is a good example, because that, if you don't know, that's what Greg calls the simplest possible thing. I'm going to show it to you. It used to be called simplest possible thing. Now it's a bit more subtle. So it's a simple CQRS example. And in here we have nice stuff, like we have a fake bus, which we don't actually need. We have event store, we have command handlers, read models, stuff like that. But there is one thing there that I always notice, and that's called infrastructure crap. Don't bother reading, it's not important. And I bet you money, and I've seen this happening, and most of the people look here to understand how things work. And it's actually not a very small file. I mean, it's the simplest possible thing. It's almost 300 lines long, and it's infrastructure crap. The issue here is that, I mean, it tackles some issues that are not really issues. It's probably not really important today because it could be replaced by newest features of C# and the C# code. The point is that infrastructure crap that's not important, you don't need to bother looking there. In the real life production grade event source systems is quite a lot. So let's have a look how it might look, how I can visualize it. That's my first edition of the book code, or maybe the in some early chapters. That's the code from early chapters. It's pretty small, so it has a few, what I find, necessary abstractions. When the time comes, we have a bit more. So we have the store, we have the app service, which probably is not really necessary. We have a checkpoint store, we have subscription, we have some extensions, we have the service itself, we have aggregate root, the states, and stuff like that. So that is a bit more advanced code. And then the list goes on. So there are even more files in that repository. And this is just the bare minimum of things. This is not even covering day 0 problems. It's a very basic set of bootstrapping base classes, interfaces that are required to start doing something that looks real, but it's not really real. It's not production grade. It's a toy still. It is a book from it's a repository for the book. So it's built in a way that it can be put in a book and it still will not be like 800 pages of code. And what happens usually if you start building it's really for production, then you have things like that. So that's for the that's from the company where I work as a chief architect. We started to build a framework that's in the beginning only tackled event sourcing, and then we added some more modules. We wanted to wire this messaging. We wanted to add distributed traces. We wanted to add metrics. It supports the previous version of Event Store DB version 5 with TCP protocol. It supports the newest with gRPC. It has some hosting. It has some Google storage stuff. That's not important. It has serialization because you can't live without serialization. It has some ASP.NET Core extensions and stuff like that. So you can see these are projects. These are not files, really. There are hundreds of files beneath. So all of that is maybe 100,000 lines of code or even more. That's what happens when you start building production-grade systems. Your bootstrap code really starts to grow. This is another example. I removed the name of the company. I used to work for them quite a while ago. And it looks pretty similar, right? So there are some monitoring things. There are some integration parts, serialization, of course. Traces are important. You need to keep them. You need to introduce them. There are some cryptographic tools to ensure that PII is secure and can be crypto shredded or deleted safely and stuff like that. So all of it comes together to form this gigantic and sometimes bloated set of libraries, or we can call it a framework. And boom. So if you're a junior developer, join a company like that and say, okay, how this all works? Look at the code. Because we don't write documentation. Documentation is the code is the documentation, right? We are all clever developers. So we can just point to people like, okay, these are just 5,000 files with 100,000 lines of code. You can just read it all in a couple of days and understand how the whole thing works. So you can definitely do it, but you will probably fail. And then you go and write a blog post. And then the question comes like, why do we need all that code, right? So what does it do? Why don't we use just the RabbitMQ client? In this case, I was comparing it for a similar purpose. Like, why do you need a messaging middleware frameworks? Like in .NET world, it's mass transit and service bus and some others like Rebus. Why can't we use just that? Well, because you will end up building a half-assed messaging framework, because that's exactly what happened in that company where they tried to use native RabbitMQ client. So they came not close by far to mature messaging middlewares like mass transit, which again contains hundreds of thousands of lines of code and a lot of experience and a lot of thoughts, and had fixed all the flaws that happened in production systems where these middleware frameworks are used, right? So the open source frameworks and libraries, they actually built not for fun. They built out of the need to solve a particular problem in mind. And like messaging frameworks are built to solve messaging problems. They have their own quirks, right? We deal with them. We learn how to live with that. If we are not happy, we can start our own open source messaging framework, which kind of supposed to be better. If we succeed or not, it's a different story. Nevertheless, then it builds a community which starts to share their experience. They start to demand new features and bug fixes, and they also introduce new features themselves. And they introduce bug fixes because they see things running in production for quite a while using that particular framework. So if you try to do it in a company, you might, for example, lose the person who maintains this library. And if not many people know how it actually works or participate in writing it, it becomes abandonware. So open source in this sense is more sustainable. So of course, some people would say, yeah, but unless I have an enterprise behind it, And there is a problem because how can I be sure that the author of the framework won't be hit by a bus? Yes, there is a risk. So more sustainable libraries, they have wider community, and maybe they have a company behind them that leaves unpaid support and stuff like that. So you can check it out. Nevertheless, internal closed source software, it reminds me of the recent discussion between Jeremy Miller and someone else. I don't remember his name. Yeah, you don't use it frameworks. Just you know that you have engineers in a company that are professionals, and open source written by cowboys and amateurs. That I strongly disagree with that statement. It's actually the opposite. So most of people in the companies, they are good engineers, but they don't supposed to write frameworks. They want to write business code, or they don't want to. Maybe they want to have fun writing libraries and stuff, but that's not what they get paid for. They get paid for writing code that solves problems for their customers, right? And or for the users if they write internal software. They're not paid to do this kind of stuff, right? It's a big investment. So when we say, well, I will just write in code, especially if I don't have any experience, I still get it, right? I went to the course with Greg, or I have his class online, or you went to the course with me, or whatever, or our trainings in Event Store. I will write all this code myself, and then you want to hit a strike immediately. That's not happening. What you really need is this. You need something that will set you in, well, I'm sorry, but it will create some boundaries for you, so you don't make these obvious mistakes and production issues on day 1, day 2, day 3, right, or year 1. It will address. You need some code that lives in below your business code that will prevent this issue from happening, and it needs to be documented enough so you can understand what might happen and what things you could do to prevent it. Or it already has mechanisms for you to ensure that things don't go awry, and it has enough tips and tricks, maybe even some online courses or whatever, to support you in because all the authors of libraries and frameworks, they want to have positive feedback, and they want you to be successful using it. So they have motivation to make it successful. So that's why I said I'm fed up, and I want to do something about it. I mean, I'm not the first one. I saw people trying to make effort and solve the complexity of event sourcing, or hide it somewhere in a lot of boilerplate, bootstrap code, or whatever set of abstractions that allow people to create a business value quickly. I made my own effort, and it lives on that very simple address, eventsourcing.net. And I can show you some code of the application that uses it. And maybe if we have time, I can show you some code that makes it work. So you can see the scale of that stuff, right? Let's have a look.